Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today was just one of those days where it was just sitting there in bed thinking about what type of video I want to upload, because I just couldn't think of anything, and everything that I could think of just, you know, seemed like too much effort. And then I remembered that there's still a few tags that I have been tagged in that I haven't done yet, so that's what we're doing today. Today we are doing the Sandman Book Tag, in which I was tagged in by the Booktube goddess, who is also the creator of the tag. And the tag, of course, is inspired by the Sandman comics and now also TV show. And basically in the Sandman you have anthropomorphic personifications of different concepts, and these concepts were the inspiration for the different prompts. I'm not going to explain in detail what each anthropomorphic personification is and what their character is and why the prompt fits the character, but if you want to know all about that, I will leave the link to the Booktube goddess's video down below, because she explained it beautifully. So yeah, also I can't really explain it for all the personifications because I have only seen the first season of the TV show and read the first volume of the comic, so I haven't actually even met all the personifications yet. But anyway, we have, I think, let me see, we have 7 questions, so let's get into it. So the first prompt is, Destiny, what book or character do you think reflects your own life? And I had a really hard time with that, obviously, because I read 90% fantasy, so, you know, in terms of a book reflecting my own life and a character reflecting my own life, doesn't work that much. And even when it comes to personality, I have to be honest, I don't relate to characters very often. I might relate to aspects of those characters, but not really to the characters as a whole. However, I still chose a character and a book, and that character is Maggie from the Inkheart series. The reason why I chose her is obviously because she is a girl who loves reading. When I was a little child, when I was 12 years old, so I read this first when I was about the same age as Maggie, which, to be honest, didn't happen with a lot of books, that I first read them when the main characters were in the same like part of life as I was. Usually most characters were quite a bit older, because when I was a teenager I mostly already read adult. And so first of all, Maggie was the same age as I was when I first read this. She loved books, I loved books, and the main thing that always made me relate to Maggie as a child was that Mo had this huge camping bus that they used to travel everywhere. I mean, of course, Maggie and Mo didn't stay in one place for a long time, so she didn't really have a home aside from the camping bus. I obviously lived in Vienna all my childhood, but nevertheless my dad still also had a huge camping bus that we used to travel a lot. That kind of was like a third home for me. Third because my parents were separated, so I had 2 homes originally anyway, and I just loved the bus, and that bus was what I always saw in my, you know, brain whenever Maggie talked about Mo's bus. The second prompt is death. What book presented death or dying in a way that was unexpected for you? And for that one, I know I keep talking about this series, but I just had to go with A Chorus of Dragons by Jen Lyons. The reason for that is that, I mean, on the one hand, there is somewhat a kind of personification of death. You have a goddess of death who, you know, personifies death as well, but the way she was presented wasn't really all that unexpected. The thing that was really unexpected for me was that this is a fantasy series that has resurrection and reincarnation as part of the world building. So you obviously have the goddess of death, and canonically within the world you can petition the goddess to bring back loved ones from death. And because of that, there's a lot of characters that return within the series, and that get resurrected. There's also characters that die, but there's also a lot that get resurrected. And I just found that a really neat idea and I really loved it. One thing I worry about a lot when it comes to resurrection within fantasy books is that it lowers the stakes because death is kind of, you know, taken out of the picture. But in the case of this series, I didn't find that was the case at all. There was still a ton of stakes, mostly emotional and, you know, trauma-induced stakes. But yeah, I really loved what Jen Lyons did with death within the series, and that's why I just had to choose it for this prompt. Prompt number 3, dream. What book is like a dream or a nightmare? And I wasn't really sure how I should interpret this prompt. So what I did was I chose a book and a series where dreams and nightmares actually kind of play a somewhat important role, and that is The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. Right at the very beginning of this series, we are brought across the mystery, or especially this first book, we are given the mystery that there's children who are taken, they vanish, and when they return they cannot sleep anymore. And it's kind of very much of a background plot for the first half to 2/3 of this book, but it becomes a lot more important towards the end of the story, and just, you know, dreams, nightmares and so on kind of somewhat play a role. So you know what, I thought this one is good enough, and you know, always an excuse to talk about one of my favorite books by now of all time. Prompt number 4 is The Prodigal. What is your favorite book about the prodigal character? I actually, well, I didn't have to look it up what a prodigal character is, because the BookTube goddess so kindly provided a definition, and that is that within literature, a prodigal character is a character that, you know, leaves home, changes, but ultimately returns back home again. And for that one, I chose a book that I have not talked about in a while, but that I really need to reread, and that is The Queens of Inish, Leah by Tessa Gretton. This is a retelling of King Lear by Shakespeare. It's adult high fantasy, although it very much is the type of adult high fantasy where it's obvious that the main countries that this is set in are supposed to be Great Britain and France. And while we do follow multiple characters in the story, obviously mainly the 3 sisters that are also at the center of the story in King Lear, the youngest sister, Elia, really is the central main character, and she's also the character that, you know, leaves home, changes, and then also returns home again as a changed person. And I don't really want to say anything more for fear of spoiling it, although if you know Shakespeare's King Lear, you will know a lot of the plot points of this book as well. But yeah, definitely can recommend The Queens of Inish, Leah. I loved it so much. Number 5 is Desire. What is the sexiest book you have read? And the BookTube goddess kind of stole one of my answers for that one. I would have gone with Crucial Start as well, because this is a high fantasy series that really takes what is usually violence within the fantasy. You know, you kind of have this veil of violence over everything, especially in grimdark fantasy, and just, you know, this underlayer of grimy, violent stuff, and just turns it into sensuality. And what is usually violence in other books is sensuality in this book. Although I talked about it to Scylla like just yesterday, because she just finished this on my recommendation, I would like to say, and she enjoyed it. We just talked about it, how it's really sad that this fantasy series sometimes kind of gets ignored just because, you know, there's somewhat of a focus on sex in it, although there isn't even that much sex, I would say, just because it has this veil of sensuality over it. And somehow, I don't know, I guess dude bros like that less than violence, so you know what. But I'm not going with Crucial Start. I am instead going to go with The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nivo. This is not necessarily a sexy book in that there is a lot of intimacy or a lot of smut in it. But first of all, I just personally find Nivo's writing very sexy, because I find beautiful writing sexy. And then the second thing is that Nivo just has a way about writing intimacy that's just unlike any other author I have ever read. And the sex scene in this book, there's only one sex scene really, it's just beautiful, so good, so gorgeous. I absolutely love it. So yeah, so my SD card was full and I hope it didn't cut me off there at the end, but if it did, I am very sorry. Prompt number 6 is Despair. What is the most depressing book you have ever read? And for that one I chose 2 books because, you know, you can't stop me from choosing 2 books. First, I have the book that literally made me depressed for a few days because, I don't know, it just hit me so hard, and that was Dead Poets Society, which, you know, the book that's based on the movie. If you've seen the movie, you know the movie is depressing as fuck. The book isn't any better. I read it and I was like, yeah, I don't want to anymore. I was in a funk for like 3 or 4 days probably. And then the second book I have is a book by an author who somehow just, you know, can't write non-depressing books, and that is Fable by R.F. Kuang. Fable, an Arcane History, or The Importance of Violence, something along those lines. I don't know what the subtitle is anymore because for some reason there. The Necessity of Violence, an Arcane History of the Oxford Translators' Revolution. And, you know, this book is about the violence of translation, or translation as an inherent act of violence. It's about colonialism, it's about dark academia, it's about characters who are completely fucked up. So, yeah, I would say this counts as a depressing book. Also, R.F. Kuang is just one of those authors who just can't let their characters be happy, so yeah, that's why I chose this one as well. And the last one is Delirium. What is the most absurd or nonsensical book you have ever read? And I am not a big fan of absurdism, so I tend to go out of my way to not read absurdism. But I would say, actually, I just thought of another one, but I like this one more, so I'm gonna go with this one. But Terry Pratchett, I decided to not continue on with Terry Pratchett. I have read The Color of Light as well as Mort. And yeah, Terry Pratchett just writes absurd fantasy, and if that's your thing, I think he's very good at that. If that's not your thing, be warned. But I would still say that his books are worth checking out, even if you're not usually into absurdism like I am, because I still gave both of the books like 3-ish stars overall. And that was it for this video. Tell me in the comments down below which books would you have answered for all of the prompts, and what are your thoughts on the books that I have mentioned. If you have read them, do you think that I picked good books for the prompts? If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as to my book club are linked in the description box down below, so go and check those out, and I hope I'll see you very soon. Bye!